Saša, it seems like they've been keeping you busy. You've been a Middle Eastern correspondent and video journalist for the National and other CBC news programs since 2011, even contributing to other news organizations before that. You're an award-winning journalist and have covered stories such as the 9/11 attacks and the genocide in Rwanda. And last we saw you on screen, you covered the closure of the Canadian embassy in Egypt, and you've been covering and reporting on the events in Israel and Syria. But how has being a foreign correspondent changed since you've started?
My main focus has been the Middle East, and as you can imagine, things in the Middle East tend to change all the time. So, it's always the same sort of mix of things. There's always war, there have been uprisings, revolutions, and riots since I've been here, dictatorships, and the occasional democracy, like here in Israel. What has changed to some extent, I guess, is that there are really fewer eyes watching what's going on pretty much anywhere in the world. Foreign correspondents are becoming a rarer breed. There are fewer foreign correspondents in Jerusalem. That's not just because the story is not as big here as it once was, but also, I think, because news organizations, newspapers certainly, television organizations, everybody is cutting back and relying on another mix of, sources for their coverage, relying on YouTube videos that are posted by activists or interviews that they get directly from people who are observers. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But if that's the only source of news that you get, along with wire services, then I think you're missing out on one element, a crucial element in your coverage. So a lot of news organizations have cut back. I mean, in terms of Canadian news organizations, right now, CBC and CTV are the only ones with full-time bureaus in Jerusalem. CTV's has been empty for a little while. They're in the process of refilling it. But even since I've been here, the Globe and Mail has shut down its bureau in Jerusalem. They now cover the Middle East from Toronto. So, these sorts of things happen, and it's unfortunate. It's part of the economic landscape, if you like, but I think it does have an impact on the reporting.
And I guess it would be on a case-by-case basis, but how has the concern for your own safety changed, if at all?
I think technology, in a way, has made it safer, or at least it's become easier to keep track of or feel that somebody is keeping an eye on what's going on, and that if I did need help, that I should be able to at least get a help message out there. Technology has made it possible. It did make it possible when I was in Turkey, for instance, and I was arrested. I didn't have access to a phone or a satellite phone. I did have access to Twitter, though, and I sent out a tweet, which then set a whole series of events in motion that I think meant that I spent probably less time in a Turkish jail than I would have otherwise. So technology, I think, has changed things. I think that has helped things. There is, of course, the other side of that, and that is that as much as journalists are using technology, governments and other intelligence agencies and military, everybody's using technology. So, yes, it helps that I can send out a message, but it's less helpful when that message or that device can also be tracked by somebody. So, for instance, in Syria, when we went into Syria a couple of times, we didn't really use cell phones at all or satellite phones deliberately because we were afraid that they might be tracked and that could cause the Syrian military to come in and get us or bomb us or whatever. We use minimal technology, and I think it's sort of a balance. So I think war reporting has changed because of things like technology. That's probably the biggest change that I can think of.
Mm-hmm. And you were talking about the things that you do have access to, both in terms of technology and gear. When out covering a story, what do you usually carry around with you? I can imagine there is quite a bit of moving around at times.
Sure, it depends. If I am working with, in the traditional kind of crew environment, and I would have a cameraman or camerawoman with me. They would be sort of taking care of the shooting technology, the technology that allows us to take pictures and sound and do live hits and those kinds of things. I do work in that context sometimes here, but if I am shooting things myself, like I did in Syria, like I've done in Turkey and Egypt and other places, then I have to have, obviously I have to have a way of shooting. And, you know, that is a modest size camera. It's not as big as the big cameras that the camera people use. Also, I have to have a way of either, I guess, editing or at least consolidating the things that I've recorded. So that's a laptop. The laptop is also used, can be used for doing live hits, doing interviews like this one. And then I guess the other big thing, or it's not such a big thing, but it's very important, is my phone. You know, a phone, a smartphone these days. I've done hits, live hits into, you know, CBC News Network from northern Iraq on my cell phone, and the quality sometimes is better than it is from a hotel room or from some other place where you have a landline. So a phone obviously can do a lot of the same sorts of things that a computer can, but when it comes to broadcast television, you need to have the camera. So it's that kind of combination of things. And so when I went into Syria, for instance, and I was shooting all of my own material, that is the mix of things that I had. Although, as I say, I wasn't really using my phone at that stage.
Mm-hmm. It really is amazing how much even such small technology can take us in terms of broadcasting. You mentioned
Sure.
your crew. How big is the team that you work with on the ground when you do work with them, and what kind of people do you look to connect with?
Well, I usually, if I do work with a crew, I would have a camera person and myself. On the technical side, that's basically it. I rarely work with a producer on the ground. It has happened, but it is rare. What's more common, in fact, essential in most cases, is to work with some kind of a fixer translator. Fixer is really a journalistic term, but it's essentially the person who is usually on the ground, who knows the place you're going to. If you're going to Syria, it's usually a Syrian. If you're going to Egypt, it's an Egyptian. Aside from their language skills, which are very important, because obviously I don't speak all the languages for the different places that I go to. It's also very important that they have local knowledge, that they know the situation on the ground. That's important for the story, of course, because you rely on them to point you in the direction of people who you want to talk to. You, of course, tell them what you're looking for, but they are the ones who usually set these things up and you know, do the digging and the convincing of people that they should be talking to you. So they're very critical in that sense. They're also very critical from a safety perspective, because in a lot of places I don't have a security person with me, but I do have that local person who can read the signs, who can understand what people are saying, who can look around and see whether people are leaving for some reason, or you know, whether there's a danger that he is seeing, that he is sensing, that I would not sense because I don't understand the language, or more importantly, I can't read the body language and other sorts of things in the same way.
And since connecting with the locals and fixers is such a crucial part to covering these stories, what's the reception of Canadian reporters like, and how useful is your Canadian passport?
I think it's very useful. I think it's far better than having a, well, it's probably better than many passports, about the same as most European passports, and better than an American passport, for instance. But, you know, that only goes so far. Canada itself also has kind of changed its position. Politically, it's not the Boy Scout that it once was in this region. It doesn't work that way anymore. It hasn't been trying to do that. In fact, you know, it's made it very clear that it's taking Israel's side in a lot of the things that go on in the Middle East, and it misses no opportunity to say so. So, you know, when you're traveling in Arab countries, people who pay attention know that that has happened. when you're traveling in the West Bank, you know, I've had people stop me and say, why has Canada changed its position? We used to rely on Canada for things. Now, some people will argue with you, some people will simply point that out. Other people might be a little more violent about that. So there's that. The other thing is that even though I travel with a Canadian passport, I am still a representative, a visual sort of representative of the West, or the North, if you like, you know. But at the end of the day, you know, you're either an Egyptian, for instance, or you're not an Egyptian. And there have been campaigns by, you know, under both the, I guess, the democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood government that was there for a while, and the current military-inspired government, basically saying, don't trust foreigners. Foreigners are evil. Foreigners are the reason why we have pretty much any trouble you can think of, whether it be, you know, everything from terrorism to street crime to traffic jams to shortages of electricity. Foreigners are to blame. So, you know, in a country like Egypt, where 50% of the population is illiterate, where education is a scarce commodity, people tend to believe these things. So at the end of the day, you are a foreigner and you are responsible for their ills. So, you know, a Canadian passport is great if you get to it, and it can really, really be useful under particular circumstances, but it's not the, you know, the passport to everything that perhaps it once was.
Mm-hmm. And hopefully it doesn't come to this point, but you did mention that sometimes people can respond with violence. When you find yourself reporting in danger zones, are there specific things that you watch out for? Yeah,
I think, well, you have to be very, very alert. You have to, you know, try to read the signs as much as you can. You have to have a conversation with your fixer or anybody else that you know in the area who, you know, to know danger points and what should we be doing. I guess in Canada we are, to some extent, as we grow up, we're taught that the police are your friend, and that's where you run to if you run into trouble. In many of these countries, it's exactly the opposite. If you run into trouble, you want to run away from the police. So you have to know these sorts of things, know what you can do, what you can't do, what you should be doing, etc. But in some places, Egypt, for instance, the mood of a crowd can shift very, very quickly. Things can change very easily. So when you've got these demonstrations, small or large, in places like Tahrir Square or other places in Egypt, you know, people can be very happy. There can be kids on the shoulders of their parents. People can be waving flags. Everything can be just great. And in an instant, something could set people off. The military shoots into the air even. Somebody throws a rock at somebody else or at the military. Somebody points out that there are foreigners in the crowd. Look, that TV crew. And of course, you can't really hide as a TV crew. Something like that happens, and the mood can shift, especially in Egypt, I've found, in an instant. And suddenly people who were relaxed and laughing and perhaps even you know, chatting with you a moment ago now have scowls or are angry, or worse, they're chasing you out of the square. So, you know, as much as you try to figure out what the signs are, sometimes you are in a different place and it's difficult to do. I also want to get a little bit into the specifics, so much as to what you even pack and what the clothes that you wear. From your headwear to your shoes, I imagine the terrain varies and wear and tear does happen quite often. You know, you figure out what works for you, what's comfortable for you, and knowing that you may have to be doing everything from interviewing someone who considers themselves very, very important, whether it be a tribal chief, whether it be a cabinet minister, you know, a general, whatever, a mayor, all the way down to sort of slogging through back alleys or across desert dunes or whatever it happens to be. So you've got to kind of bridge all of that and be dressed in a fairly neutral way so that you're not offending anybody, but at the same time you're comfortable enough for all the different things you need to go for. You know, as a general kind of thing, I usually wear short sleeve shirts with a collar, or I might just wear like a, you know, black t-shirt, because that tends to kind of go anywhere, and you're very difficult to identify what you really are doing or who you are when you're dressed that way. One of the things that you want to avoid, though, is to try to not to look like you're military. Especially if you're going into a military zone, you don't want to be dressed in the same colors that military wears, because you could be identified, even without realizing it, with one side or the other, just because you're wearing, you know, olive green pants or you know, a camouflage style baseball cap or something like that. That may seem very practical, and it may just be something that you grab and put on, but it could also send the wrong signals to people who are also reading your body language and what you're wearing. So those kinds of things are pretty much critical. But all that being said, I mean, I think you try to be comfortable. You try to protect yourself from things like the sun. I mean, most of it is pretty mundane. Make sure you have sunscreen and mosquito repellent and things like that, just because those things can often slow you down more surely than some guy with a gun.
Mm-hmm. Now, driving away from the specific logistics now, is there a story that you've covered that has really stuck with you?
Oh, I think this region is full of stories like that. You know, every time you go into, for instance, a refugee camp in northern Jordan, Zaatari, for instance, on the border with Syria, and meet the families who are there and not have stories that you walk away from. You know, one tent, these people who have just fled Syria with all of their belongings and who are now living in this small tent with 3 or 4 kids, and you know, their whole world is essentially this small patch of desert in Jordan, when they had a lifestyle, a very middle-class lifestyle that was not that dissimilar from living in a small town in Canada. You know, and you go in and you start talking to them, and the first thing they do in the middle of this dust and desert is to pull out a silver tray with glassware and serve you coffee, which they brought with them from Syria, and they point out, hey, this is Syrian coffee. So, you know, it's just these little things that people do that sort of remind you that there is still, I don't know, I guess a sense of dignity, a sense of humanity that goes inside them. Also a sense of humor. I mean, I remember being in Aleppo, for instance, with a commander of the Free Syrian Army who was showing me around, and who, to a large extent, we were relying on with our lives in many ways. And we were dealing with a very serious situation. We were on the front lines, and the snipers from the government were shooting from buildings just not that far away, and we were going through the old city. But, you know, he was constantly joking. He was joking about I don't know, the weapons that they had to put together, the slingshots that they used, for instance, those kinds of things. So these kinds of things are sort of stick with you, that even in these totally weird situations, totally unusual, especially if you come from a country like Canada, people are still human, and they still kind of revert to using things like humor to make really, really, really bad situations livable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the situation, as I mentioned before, the getting arrested in Turkey is obviously you know, that will stick with you for a while. It wasn't as serious, perhaps, as it may sound, but sure, it was serious. You don't know what's going to happen, and you don't know where you're going, and you have no control over where you are, and you're relying on other people to try to sort of get you out of that situation. And at the end of the day, you're behind bars. I think maybe the most bizarre thing that I've been through in the Middle East that stuck with me is being in Libya, in meat locker, a room the size of, I don't know, an average size bedroom, for instance, and with Muammar Gaddafi's body in the middle of it, lying in the middle of it. And this was on the outskirts of Misrata. And so we go there, and there's a lineup of people lined up outside, Libyans, who are waiting to come in and see the body. It's very, very hot outside. People have been standing for a long time. You ask them, why are they standing there? And they tell you, we need to see this body because this guy has been so much larger than life for so long that we don't really believe that he's dead until we see his body. So you go into this room and they let people in, maybe 10 or 12 at a time. Everybody, as they come in, the first thing they do is they run to the body and try to take selfies with the dead body. Now, Gaddafi is lying on the floor. He's wrapped in blankets or rugs. He's been shot in the middle of the forehead, so you can see that. You can see the bullet hole there. So as people go and try to take their pictures with the dead body lying on the floor, kind of crouching down and smiling up at the camera, the guards are yelling Allah Akbar, God is great, at the top of their lungs, which is echoing around, and trying to chase the people away from the body so they don't take pictures. So this bizarre scene where you have Muammar Gaddafi lying dead on the ground with a bullet hole in his forehead in the middle of this room, and a dozen people running around in circles being chased by military guys with guns yelling God is great at the top of their lungs. And this goes on for maybe 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and then they shoo everybody out of the room, and the next group comes in and they repeat the whole thing all over again. So it's so surreal. It's kind of unbelievable in a way. You kind of almost forget that this is, in a way, you know, you've got a dead body and there should be some dignity and everything, but there's no dignity. It's all about the scene in this case. So things like that, I mean, definitely stick with you.
Wow, yes. Now, from the people that you've met and seen to the actual journalists working in the field, I'd just like to know, especially of late, it's a huge issue with the ISIS stories. What do you think about freelancers risking their lives for the job?
I think it's a very dangerous trend. You know, I think pretty much any responsible news director has decided that Syria these days is not a safe place for foreign journalists, anybody really to be. It's not even safe for the Syrians, but I guess they don't have much of a choice. Foreign news directors have, you know, whether you ask them or not, they have spoken with their assignments. They do not send their crews, their reporters, their photographers into Syria. Occasionally somebody will sneak in a little bit over the border and, you know, do a story or two and sneak out. But more and more that's not happening, even with organizations that take risks, organizations that know how to do this kind of thing. The BBC, CNN, Sky, you know, they have a lot of resources and they tend to go even to places that others won't. They're not really going into Syria anymore either. It's just too dangerous, outside of Damascus, I mean. So if that's the case, if we as journalists and as, you know, sort of large journalism organizations have decided that this is too dangerous a place to go, I think it's irresponsible to rely on material that freelancers put out, especially if they're freelancers, you know, Canadian freelancers, for instance, providing Canadian material to organizations that themselves wouldn't send their own person in. A freelancer who is fairly poorly paid, a freelancer who does not have the same resources that a you know, a staff journalist or a journalist working with an organization would have, does not have the security person that I mentioned, does not have the satellite phones necessarily, does not have a way of communicating if they get in trouble, does not have the training perhaps that, you know, we have to go through training. We have to repeat that training every couple of years to make sure that we know what we're doing and to have a certain basic level of medical training and safety and all of that stuff. Generally speaking, they don't. And they tend to be young, they tend to be inexperienced, not all of them, but many of them. It's really not fair for major news organizations to kind of throw them a little bit of money every once in a while just so that they can get pictures from Aleppo where they themselves wouldn't go. I think that's irresponsible, and I think people need to think a little bit more than, hey, what picture am I going to put on the front of my magazine because I need to put something there when I've got this article about, you know, the political situation of Syria that I've written from outside the country, but I need a picture to illustrate it.
Right. Saša Petricic, Middle Eastern correspondent for CBC News. I'm Mariel Torrefranca for j-source's International Reporting Bureau at Humber College.